Greetings viewers. I'm happy to announce that an anti-Zionist YouTuber has responded to my recent challenge. YouTuber Nate Glenn has responded, and even though I can see many flaws with his arguments, he has at least attempted to respond to what I actually said. Unfortunately, however, he decided to latch on to a simple comment I left in the description column but didn't actually mention in the video. And that's the issue of what Martin Luther King had to say about Israel back in 68. And Nate Glenn has produced another video, and while not specifically directed at me, it was it clearly kind of was, where he has attempted to take the moral high ground. This is rather ironic in many ways, because I also had a link to Zionists for Ron Paul, and if you look at Nate Glenn's homepage, he's a Ron Paul supporter. I'll discuss the Martin Luther King issue in a moment, even though it's largely a red herring. But first of all, let's have a listen to what Ron Paul had to say about Israel.
In many ways, we treat Israel as a stepchild. We do not give them the responsibility that they deserve. We undermine their national sovereignty. We don't let them design their own peace treaties with their neighbors. And then we turn around and say that when you want to do that or you want to defend your borders, they have to check it out with us. I think Israel would be a lot safer. I made the point earlier. We give 3 times as much money to the Arabs. Why do we arm their enemies? So if you care about Israel, you should be against all the weapons that go to the Arab nations. And I just don't see any purpose in not treating Israel in an adult fashion. I think they'd be a lot better off. I think they one time in the 80s took care of a nuclear reactor in Iraq. I stood up and defended Israel for this. Nobody else did at that time. But we need to recognize they deserve their sovereignty just as we deserve our sovereignty. I believe if they assume more responsibility, there would be more peace there, and that there would be a lot less threat to us. And besides, we don't have any money to do this.
We missed you.
We'll extend this quickly. 30 seconds, Mayor Giuliani. Then.
Now, whatever else may be said about Ron Paul, I completely agree with what he just said, as does the Zionist Freedom Alliance, and I provide a link to their website in my description column. The same globalists who are undermining American sovereignty and the sovereignty of numerous other countries are also undermining the sovereignty of both the Arabs and the Israelis and the Iranians and everybody else. But anyway, on with the Martin Luther King issue. As we can see from the description column in Nate Glenn's video, he's deploying a fairly common anti-Zionist straw man. That is the notion that people who are pro-Israel automatically say that anyone who criticises Israel or Zionism is automatically an anti-Semite. That is, quite frankly, a load of bollocks. I know of no serious Israel advocate who actually thinks that. And indeed, the best criticisms of Zionism and of the policies of the State of Israel tend to come from Zionists. Fancy that. Nate Glenn is correct on a number of issues he does bring up, though. For example, Nate Glenn is quite correct in highlighting the fact that the so-called letter to an anti-Zionist friend, which Martin Luther King was alleged to have written, is a hoax. It's absolute nonsense. However, the pro-Israel comments attributed to Martin Luther King, which I referred to, incidentally in an article which was really about whether Israel's an apartheid state or not, right, are actually attributed to this guy, Congressman John Lewis. Congressman John Lewis was a prominent civil rights activist back in the 1960s. He was a personal friend of Martin Luther King. And it is him who is saying that that Martin Luther King was pro-Israel. And again, I provide lots of links to the various articles about the hoax and about the comments. So you can read it all for yourself. Now, Congressman John Lewis was, on a number of occasions, brutally beaten up by both angry mobs and Alabama State Police. Now, Nate Glenn is suggesting that there's no real evidence. We've only got John Lewis's word for what Martin Luther King said, and that's probably true. However, that would suggest that Nate Glenn thinks that Congressman John Lewis is lying. Now, I suppose that's possible. It's been a long time since the 1960s, and he is a politician, and they do often lie. However, if Nate Glenn wants to say that this guy is lying, well, he's welcome to kind of prove it. Nate Glenn is also basically correct when he highlights the fact that appealing to the authority of Martin Luther King on the issue of Israel is a logical fallacy, which is why I don't, and very few people do, at least certainly not solely. It's just, at least to me, is an interesting aside. Just as appealing to the authority of Mahatma Gandhi, who was anti-Zionist, is a logical fallacy as well. And indeed, I provide a link to an article from a Zionist website which analyses why Gandhi had an anti-Zionist position. I mean, there are very real political reasons for it. And also Gandhi was a bit naive on certain issues. His non-violent methods would have been totally ineffective against, for example, the German Nazis. Anyway, let's listen to a little bit of what Nate Glenn has to say in his video, and I invite you, I encourage you to actually go and look at the entire video. I just don't have the time to fit it all in. So let's have a look.
But if you think about it, if Martin Luther King Jr. knew what's going on in Israel and the occupied territories, do you really think he'd support it?
No, of course he wouldn't. I'm sure he would unequivocally condemn the use of children as soldiers, training them, providing them with hate indoctrination, using them as suicide bombers. And these pictures alone shouldn't convince anyone, so I provide plenty of links in my description column to plenty of evidence that this isn't just simply Israeli propaganda. I'm quite sure he would condemn a political movement first sponsored by the British imperialists and then the German Nazis, and in more modern times, particularly since the 50s, the United States. Incidentally, the CIA are the ones who trained the Fatah death squads, which are known as the police force. And I'm quite sure he would unequivocally condemn the Israeli establishment, who are cooperating with all of this, and whose cooperation with this is leading to increasing numbers of deaths of both Israelis and Arabs. In short, I'm sure Martin Luther King would demand that the globalist imperialists get their filthy imperialistic protuberances out of the Middle East and let the Arabs and Jews make their own peace.
It doesn't take much brain power to figure this out. Israel is a racist construct.
It doesn't take much brain power to figure out that one of the most multicultural and ethnically diverse countries on the planet cannot possibly be a racist construct, regardless of any shortcomings that the nation of Israel may currently have. As can be seen from this exchange with SilverRedIndigo, Nate Glenn should already know this, but instead decided to try and cage her, claiming that her use of the word Pals for Palestinians was a racial slur. Well, no, it's not. For one thing, the Palestinians aren't a race, and if anything, it's a term of endearment. One can sort of imagine these charmers here saying, "I'm going with me pals to march for the pals." Come on, Nate Glenn. Pals is no more a racial slur than Brits, Turks, Yankees, Aussies or Skips. Incidentally, for those of you who want to learn more about Judaism, and also what could be called the dark side of Zionism, I do recommend SilverRedIndigo's channel.
Imagine that. Imagine Martin Luther King telling you you're a racist if you don't support the state that builds huge prisons for babies to be born into. Does that make sense? Is that a good argument? Or is that the most despicable falsehood that you can imagine?
No. What is truly despicable is the argument that a movement which marches along with open anti-Semites and even neo-Nazis in solidarity with a globalist-sponsored movement, which is a Trojan horse in the Middle East, is in any serious way progressive anti-war or anti-imperialist. And for those anti-Zionists out there who have been hoodwinked by this movement, and I'm not at all proud to admit that I once was, I call upon you to educate yourself, to learn more about this movement, to learn what its true agenda is. If you are truly concerned with the humanitarian plight of Arabs and Muslims, you will do this. If not, then at least admit that you're part of one of the most disgraceful pseudo-grassroots movements currently operating in the West. At least be honest enough to admit that. Catch you later.